I spent 2 winters quietly paying to keep my parents' house warm, over $8,000 every dollar scraped from my own survival. And then, just weeks before Thanksgiving, my father called and told me not to come home because my sister needed a calm environment. What happened next shattered everything I believed about family, and what I did in return, they never saw coming. The radiator in my apartment hums like an old lullaby, soft and rhythmic beneath the silence of an early Minnesota evening. Outside, snow coats the sidewalk in a thin, almost polite layer, just enough to whisper that winter has arrived. Inside, a single lamp casts a warm halo across my living room floor, catching the edge of the photo on my shelf. My parents, smiling. Thanksgiving 2015, before everything frayed. My name is Claire Dawson. I'm 35, and I live alone in a 1-bedroom apartment on the east side of St. Paul. It's not glamorous. There's a crack in the kitchen tile that I keep covering with an old rug, and the windows let in just enough cold air to remind me how old this place is. But it's mine. Every square inch of it earned through 10-hour shifts at the logistics warehouse where I load cargo. I lift crates, sort parcels, and clock in before sunrise. My back aches most mornings, but there's a certain pride in pain that comes from building something on your own. I've never minded the hard work. Not really. I was raised to believe that when you love someone, you show it by carrying what they can't. My father Frank used to say that family is the only real investment in life. Jobs come and go, he'd mutter while sipping his bitter black coffee, but family is where you build your roots. So I spent most of my adult life trying to hold our family together, like patching an old quilt with threadbare corners. My mom, Nora, is gentle in that kind of quiet breaking glass way, fragile and kind, always folding laundry, or peeling apples in the kitchen, humming hymns. And then there's Melody, my younger sister by 4 years, charismatic, sensitive. A storm in a teacup, always on the edge of overwhelm. Everyone tiptoed around her emotions like they were landmines. And I was the one who picked up the slack. Over the past 2 winters alone, I've sent more than $8,000 to help my parents keep their house warm. It wasn't something they demanded, at least not explicitly. But every time the furnace creaked or the oil bill climbed, I was the first to get a call. "Claire, your mom's been coughing again. This winter's rougher than usual." Or, "The repair guy said we need a new valve." I never questioned it. I'd wire the money, log the transfer in a spreadsheet, and return to my shift. 1 January, the furnace broke in the middle of the night. My dad called at 1:23 a.m. His voice was hoarse. "We're freezing, honey." By 1:45, I'd sent $600. In March, I arranged repairs when the unit clanked so loud it scared their cat. In September, when Melody emptied her savings to launch an artisanal candle line that flopped within weeks, I footed the bill for heating oil so my parents wouldn't have to choose between warmth and groceries. They never asked where the money came from, never asked how I managed the rent, or if I had enough left for myself. I skipped dinners, ignored the growing hole in my boots, and told myself it was okay. This is what you do for family. You give even when no one gives back. Every Thanksgiving, I caught a Greyhound home, bundled in layers, carrying homemade pies in foil tins. My job barely gave me time off, but I always went. I'd sit at the crowded table in our drafty old house on Ashwood Street, laugh at Dad's corny jokes, and quietly slip envelopes for the furnace into Mom's apron pocket. Because to me, family wasn't just obligation, it was sacred. And no matter how hard things got, I believed that love, real steadfast love, meant staying, giving, showing up over and over, even when you were tired. But this year something is different. I haven't booked my bus ticket. The pies are store-bought now, sitting untouched on the counter. And that photo from 2015, the one where Dad's arm is slung around my shoulder, feels more like a souvenir from a place I no longer belong. I used to believe that home was wherever they were, that as long as I kept showing up, I'd eventually be seen. But lately I've started to wonder, what if the only person who was showing up for me was me? And if that's true, if I've spent all these years keeping a house warm that never held space for me, what does that say about the love I thought we shared? The radiator continues its low murmur. I set my tea down beside the photo and glance out at the snow. For the first time in a long time, I don't feel guilty. Just still, quiet, like maybe the cold outside isn't so scary after all. It started with a familiar vibration on the kitchen counter. Claire Dawson, elbow deep in soapy dishwater, glanced over and saw the name flash across her phone. Dad. She dried her hands hastily, half smiling, thinking maybe, just maybe, he was calling to ask what pie she'd bring this year. She hadn't been home for Thanksgiving in a while, and despite everything, despite the bills, the weight of expectations, some part of her still hoped for warmth. She tapped the green button. "Hey, Dad." There was a pause. Then Frank Dawson's voice, too light to be casual. "Claire, hey, I wanted to call you about Thanksgiving." She straightened a hand, bracing the counter. "Sure," she said. "I was going to surprise you. I hadn't booked my ticket yet, but I think it's better if you don't come this year." Silence. The kind that settles not in the room, but in the chest. "I'm sorry," she said, certain she'd misunderstood. "It's Melody." He continued, his voice practiced now like he'd rehearsed this. "She's been going through a rough patch. Her anxiety's flaring up. The candle business thing didn't go well, and she's sensitive lately. We're trying to keep things peaceful." Claire stared out the small kitchen window. Frost was forming at the edges. "You're saying I'm not invited because Melody is stressed?" She asked, the words slow and deliberate. "It's not like that," Frank said. "We just thought it might be best for everyone. This year." Her fingers gripped the counter's edge. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She just stood there and remembered. She remembered the emergency call in February, the one where her mother whispered that the furnace had gone out in the middle of the night. Claire had wired $600 within minutes, then waited 3 hours in the ER parking lot for her night shift. She remembered April when Melody decided to invest in candle branding, drained her account, and Claire again stepped in quietly. Another $700 for heating oil, and then, September, another $400. "Just in case. You do know," Claire said softly, "that I've sent over $4,800 this year alone, right? So you could have a warm house while I slept in 2 sweaters to save money." Frank sighed, that low, dismissive exhale that always made her feel like a child demanding too much. "You offered, Claire. No one forced you." She let out a quiet, hollow laugh. "Of course," she said. "Because if I hadn't, you'd be freezing. But you didn't see that. You saw a lifeline, not a daughter." "That's not fair," he said. "No." Claire said, her voice sharpening. "What's not fair is being treated like a guest in the very home I helped keep standing." Frank's voice shifted from calm to frustrated. "This is just one dinner. Don't turn it into a vendetta." Claire swallowed hard. The words came heavy, slow like stones. "You're telling me not to come home, Dad. It's for peace, Claire. Melody needs—" "I needed peace, too," she said. But when did that ever matter? There was nothing on the line but his breath. Claire walked into the living room, her boots still by the door from that morning's shift. Her apartment was small, yes, but it was hers. She paid for it. She kept it warm. Alone. She thought of the heating account she managed under her name, the oil deliveries she arranged, the careful, precise budgeting she did just to make sure her parents didn't suffer. She remembered sitting in this very room, fingers numb from the warehouse cold, transferring money she could barely spare, while Melody posted avocado brunches and self-care Saturdays. And now she was too disruptive to invite. "I won't be sending any more money," Claire said quietly. "Not for the furnace, not for oil, not for Melody's comfort." "Claire, if I'm not family enough to be at the table, then I'm not responsible for keeping the lights on." "You're being dramatic," Frank said, but it landed flat. "I'm being done," she replied. She hung up. For a moment, she didn't move. The heater in the corner clicked softly. The clock on the wall ticked on, as if nothing monumental had just happened. Then Claire walked to her laptop, opened the heating provider's portal, clicked into her account. Her hand hovered over the auto-payment toggle. She paused, not out of doubt, but to remember. She remembered her mother's thankless silence, Melody's constant chaos, her own exhaustion. Then, she clicked. Autopay disabled. Last scheduled payment, November 2nd. Claire stood back. Outside, the snow was beginning to fall again, slow and sure. And for once, she didn't feel like she was out in the cold. She was in, finally. Even if she was alone. Claire sat at the edge of her bed laptop, open on her knees. The room filled only with the hum of her little space heater and the muffled sound of wind pushing against the windows. On the screen glowed a simple spreadsheet, rows of dates, dollar amounts, notes, written in haste late at night or during lunch breaks at the warehouse. The numbers stared back at her cold and precise. $8, $40.17. That was the sum total of 2 winters of sacrifice. 2 years of heat bills, emergency repairs, late-night oil refills, and quiet generosity. Money that could have been new tires, a dental cleaning, a weekend trip to Chicago, a coat that actually blocked wind. She scrolled through the entries slowly. January 14th, $500, emergency furnace repair. March 2nd, $320, late oil refill. May 28th, $180, advance for summer air conditioning unit. September 11th, $400, just in case early autumn fill. Each line was a story. Not one of them told aloud. She thought about last Christmas, how her father had said Melody was really trying this year because she'd managed to decorate the house without forgetting the lights. Claire had been the one who paid for the tree delivery after their old one rotted in the basement. No one mentioned that. They never did. Melody had once wiped out her savings trying to start a handmade candle business. Claire still remembered the hopeful email. My brand is going to be rustic chic, but also modern luxe. You'll love it. 4 months later, the garage was stacked to the ceiling with unsold boxes, labels peeling wax melting. Her parents had shrugged it off. She's young, her mother had said. Everyone makes mistakes. Claire was 35. She couldn't afford mistakes. When Claire had cried at Thanksgiving 3 years ago because Melody made a joke about her being the sad warehouse spinster she'd been told she was overreacting. Don't be so sensitive, her father had muttered while carving turkey. You know how Melody is. Yes, Claire knew exactly how Melody was, and she knew exactly what her own role had always been. The stable one. The helper. The fixer. The one who came home with groceries instead of opinions. Who remembered everyone's birthday, even when they forgot hers. Who took on extra shifts in January because the pipes back home froze. Who quietly transferred $400 even when her own rent check cleared late. She leaned back against the headboard, the heater's warm breeze brushing her ankles. How many nights had she come home, hands cracked from the cold body, aching stomach half full, yet still felt guilty that her parents were the ones without heat. She had believed it was her responsibility, because she had strength, because she could handle it. But now she saw the truth. She had been expected to handle it. Not because they asked, but because they assumed she would. That she'd always pick up the slack, always make sure the thermostat never dipped below 65 degrees. That her warmth, her time, her money, her care was infinite. But it wasn't. Not anymore. Claire clicked out of the spreadsheet and opened the utility account. Her cursor hovered over the small red button that read, Cancel Automatic Payments. Her breath caught. This wasn't about money. It was about identity. About no longer being the invisible safety net under a crumbling house that never acknowledged her. About no longer being the afterthought, the filler daughter, the backup plan. She thought of the photo in her wallet, her parents and Melody. Smiling at last year's Thanksgiving. She had sent $300 the night before that photo was taken. They hadn't invited her. She remembered the ache in her chest that night, curled up in a second-hand recliner, eating instant mashed potatoes and watching reruns of holiday parades. Alone. She clicked. A prompt appeared. Are you sure you want to cancel this service? She typed yes. A second screen popped up. Final payment scheduled for November 2nd. Service will cease after that date. Claire stared at it. Then, without drama, without tears, she closed the laptop. She stood and walked to the window. Outside, a thin layer of snow dusted the edges of the fire escape. The city was quiet, cold. Her breath fogged the glass as she leaned forward, forehead resting gently on the frame. For 2 years, she had kept them warm. Now it was her turn. Not just to be warm, but to be whole. She wrapped herself in a blanket, padded barefoot to the kitchen, and started a kettle. Let winter come. She was done shivering for people who only called her when they were cold. The first text came 3 days after Claire canceled the heating payment. "Hey, sweetie." Nora Dawson's message began casual, but strained. "The heating system's acting up again. Could you check the settings on your end?" Claire read it while standing in the checkout line at the bookstore, a hardcover copy of Women Who Run with the Wolves tucked under her arm. The cashier smiled at her. She smiled back, and set the phone face down on the counter. She didn't reply. Later that night, as she folded laundry and listened to the soft rustle of jazz vinyl in the background, another notification buzzed. This time it was Melody. So childish, Claire. Seriously. No hello, no question. Just a flat judgment. Claire sat on the floor sorting her socks by color and stared at the message. Melody, who once cried over losing her 4th roommate because people don't get her boundaries. Melody, who called Claire's job soul decay and laughed about how she could never wear steel-toe boots. Melody, who hadn't paid a single heating bill in her life. Claire put the phone down. She didn't cry. She didn't feel guilt. What she felt was a kind of stunned relief. For the first time, she wasn't rushing to explain herself. She wasn't writing out paragraphs of reasons pleading to be understood. She simply existed in her choice, and it was quiet here, like snow falling. On the 7th day, the voicemail came. Her father's voice, stern and unyielding, filled the small apartment in harsh bursts. "Claire, call me back. I don't know what this is, but you need to stop. The house is at 58 degrees. Your mother's been wearing 2 coats. You made your point. Don't play games." She stood by the window while it played. Snow drifted against the fire escape in lazy spirals. She didn't listen to it again. Instead, she made soup potato and celery with extra garlic and cleaned out the fridge. She opened the windows for a few minutes to let fresh air in, lit a candle with sandalwood and bergamot, and wiped the counter until it shined. She was building a life, one tiny act at a time. The following morning, she woke at 6, brewed coffee in her French press, and took her time getting dressed. She'd started laying out her outfits the night before, nothing fancy, just layers that made her feel warm, purposeful. That afternoon, she bought herself a winter scarf made of real wool. Deep green, the color of pine trees in twilight. She wrapped it around her neck and looked at her reflection in a store window. She looked like someone who had finally stepped into her own skin. She didn't check her phone. When she got home, the voicemail was still there. She let it stay. Another message from Nora arrived the next day. "It's 50 degrees. Your father refuses to wear a heavy coat." Melody's been coughing. "Can you please help?" Claire stirred her tea, honey, and ginger and imagined the house on Ashwood Street. The drafty windows. The old brown sofa she once napped on as a girl. The kitchen where her mother used to peel apples in the afternoon steam, clouding the windows. But that home was no longer hers. She remembered how easily she was cut out of Thanksgiving. How small she felt in that moment, like a misplaced card in a family deck. Now the cards had been shuffled, and Claire had taken herself out of the game. She tucked the phone under a book, opened her laptop, and downloaded a guided meditation on boundary setting. As the narrator's voice filled the space with affirmations, she lay back on her couch and let her hands rest over her stomach. Deep breaths. Stillness. Across the city, snow began to fall in thick, soft sheets. The world was slowing down, blanketed in silence. Inside her small apartment, Claire felt a warmth, not from radiators, but from something steadier, something self-built. She began setting small goals, rearranging the bookshelf, watering the succulent she thought had died. writing 3 things she was proud of each night. Each act was an anchor, a quiet declaration that she mattered, even if her family no longer saw it. Winter was here, but for the first time, she didn't feel like the one left out in the cold. She felt like someone who had finally stepped inside. The texts came faster now, like a storm, swelling just past the edge of a quiet field. Mom! Claire, it's only 50 degrees in the house. Your dad refuses to wear a heavy coat, and Melody's been coughing all day. Please call me. Dad, this isn't about money anymore. It's family. Melody. You've made your point. Hope you're proud. Claire read each message in silence, her phone glowing dimly in the soft light of her kitchen. The kettle whistled behind her, steam curling around the edges of the cabinets. She poured the hot water over chamomile and lavender and let the scent drift into the room. She didn't reply. Outside, the temperature had dropped to 25 degrees. A light snow whispered across her windows, the flakes so small they almost looked like dust. Claire sat by her little space heater, wrapped in a sweater she had knit herself last winter. She opened her book, an old paperback about a woman who leaves everything behind, and read slowly, letting the words settle. Around 9 p.m., her phone began to buzz. Dad. It rang once, then again, and again. 12 calls, one after another. She didn't answer a single one. After the 12th call, a voicemail dropped. She didn't play it. She didn't need to. She knew the tone, the mix of irritation and helplessness, the attempt to guilt her back into place. Instead, she stood up, stretched, and moved to the stove, where a pot of potato and leek soup bubbled gently. She stirred it slowly, letting the heat fog the window pane. She wasn't angry. That part had long cooled. She wasn't waiting for an apology anymore either. There was only this. The warmth of her own making, the calm of a space not penetrated by demands or dismissals. As she sat down to eat, spooning soup into a handmade ceramic bowl she'd picked up from a local craft market, her phone buzzed again. This time it was Melody. I guess we were never really family to you. Got it. Claire stared at the message, her hands still warm from the bowl. That line once would have broken her. Once she would have rushed to explain, of course you're my family. I was just hurt. Not anymore. Because now she understood family wasn't just about blood. It was about presence, respect, reciprocity. And when none of that existed, what remained was only obligation wrapped in shame. She sipped her soup. Outside, the snow began to thicken. She remembered the way her fingers used to tremble in her old apartment when she couldn't afford to turn the heat above 60. Back then, every dollar she sent home meant a week of shivering for herself. But she never said no, never complained, because back then she believed being needed was the same as being loved. Now she knew better. Now she knew that her warmth had been a resource, not a relationship. A silent transaction made under the guise of loyalty. Another message. Mom. Melody's taken NyQuil. Your father has a terrible cough. The thermometer says 47 degrees. Please, Claire. Claire didn't touch her phone. She folded the blanket over her lap, set her bowl aside, and leaned back into the armchair. The room was still, peaceful. She thought about how many winters she'd endured for them, not just physically but emotionally. The cold shoulders, the dismissals, the jokes at her expense that no one stopped. The way her care was expected, but never returned. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't cruelty. This was release. Later that evening, she lit a candle on her windowsill. The flame flickered against the glass, casting a warm glow into the dark. She stood there for a long time, hands wrapped around a mug of cinnamon tea, watching the snow fall, listening to the hum of her tiny heater. And for the first time in her life, Claire felt something profound. She wasn't shivering anymore. She wasn't scrambling for space at the table. She wasn't hoping to be seen. She wasn't trying to earn the love that should have been freely given. She had stepped away from the cold. And even if the world outside remained bitter and unforgiving, even if her family continued to spiral in blame and denial, She was no longer freezing. The storm could rage. The house on Ashwood Street could drop to 30 degrees. Her father could shout. Her mother could beg, her sister could sneer. She had made her choice. And her silence wasn't punishment. It was peace. Thanksgiving morning arrived wrapped in quiet. Outside, the city looked frozen in prayer snow, blanketed every rooftop, every street corner, every whisper of life. Claire had woken early, drawn by the light slipping through her curtains. She made coffee, toasted a slice of sourdough, peeled a clementine. It was simple, quiet, warm. Everything she had never associated with this day. At 10:07 a.m., the doorbell rang. It startled her. No one ever visited unannounced. Not on a holiday. Not on this holiday. She rose slowly, her cup still warm in hand, and walked to the door. The peephole revealed a figure she recognized instantly, though it took her a moment to reconcile the man outside with the one burned into her memories. Frank Dawson. Her father. He looked smaller. The broad-shouldered man who once towered over dinner tables now seemed swallowed by his thick gray coat. His cheeks were wind-chapped, his eyes red from either cold or something older. And still that look in his eyes, one Claire had known since childhood expectation, disguised as concern. She opened the door just a crack. Warm air spilled out, instantly touching the frost on his skin. "Claire," he said, voice shaky, "we need to talk." She leaned on the frame, hand still on the knob. "I don't think today is the right day." He exhaled his breath, forming quick clouds between them. "Your mom's sick." Melody's locked herself upstairs. It's 38 degrees in there. I don't know what to do anymore." Claire kept her gaze steady. She didn't blink, didn't flinch. "I didn't cut the heat," she said, voice calm. "I just stopped paying for it. There's a difference." Frank frowned. "You know we're not good with this stuff. The account was under your name. When you canceled, they didn't tell us." "I handled everything for 2 years," Claire replied. "Over $8,000. And then you called me and told me not to come to keep the peace. So I did exactly what you asked. I stayed away." He looked down at his feet, snow clinging to the edges of his boots. His voice lowered. "We've sold nearly everything valuable. I called the oil company, but the upfront cost, we can't afford it. Your mother has a fever. I shouldn't have called you like that. But Mandy, she..." Claire interrupted gently. "Mandy always finds a way to need more than she gives." He didn't argue. "I'm not angry," she added, opening the door a little wider. "I just want you to see something." He stepped forward instinctively, but she didn't move to let him in. Instead, she let him look. The apartment was warm, cozy, without being extravagant. A small table set with a single plate. A blanket tossed over the arm of a chair. A kettle steaming on the stove. Peace radiated from the space like heat from the baseboard. "I built this," she said softly. "Every part of it, after work, between shifts, after years of being the one you all leaned on." Frank swallowed hard. "This isn't who we are." Claire shook her head. "No, Dad. This is exactly who we are. Or at least who we've been. I was never the loud one. Never the fragile one. I was just the one you could depend on without thanks. The one you forgot to invite when it got inconvenient." Silence stretched between them. "I know it's hard," she said. "I know you're scared. But I won't come back just to fix what you broke. I'm not the pillar anymore." Frank's shoulders sank. He looked older than she remembered. "I thought I was protecting the peace." "I was part of that peace," she replied. "You just didn't see it." Snow swirled around him, catching in his collar, clinging to his sleeves. Claire held the door a moment longer, then gently began to close it. "I hope Mom gets better," she said, voice quiet. "But I'm not the one who needs to hold this family up anymore." He didn't argue, he didn't plead, just nodded slow, and turned away. She closed the door behind him. The click of the lock echoed in the hallway like the final note of an old song. She stood there a moment, staring at the wood. Then she turned, walked back to the kitchen, and poured herself another cup of coffee. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the glue holding the cracks together, and she didn't feel guilty for it. She felt whole. It was a Tuesday morning, early December, and the city had sunk into a deeper freeze. Snow blanketed the balcony outside Claire's apartment like icing on a forgotten cake. The wind pressed against her windows, whispering secrets from a colder world. She was folding a scarf still warm from the dryer when the doorbell rang. Not a delivery, not a neighbor. There was a knock, steady, hesitant. Claire set the scarf down and walked quietly to the door. She didn't have to guess. She looked through the peephole, and there she was, Nora Dawson, her mother. Bundled in a thick coat that seemed too large for her frame, a wool scarf wrapped around her neck, snow clinging to her shoulders and hat. She clutched a worn handbag and stood still, barely moving except for the visible tremble in her breath. Claire opened the door just slightly. The heat from inside met the frozen air between them like two old enemies. "Claire," her mother said softly, voice shaking. "I'm sorry for coming unannounced, but I didn't know how much longer I could wait." Claire leaned on the doorframe, staying quiet. "I took the bus." Nora continued, her eyes fixed on the step beneath her feet. "Walked the last mile. Took nearly an hour. But I thought maybe you'd hear me out this time." Claire didn't move, didn't speak. Nora shifted, her gloved hands gripping the strap of her bag. "I've been thinking about Thanksgiving, about all the winters before, about how many times you helped us and we said nothing, expected it." She exhaled a short cough, breaking her composure. "I was wrong," she said. "Not just for that call, but for all the times I let you carry everything alone and treated it like it was normal, like it was expected." Claire tilted her head, watching her mother with a mix of stillness and sorrow. For the first time in decades, she saw her not as the calm presence smoothing family conflict, but as a woman weathered, uncertain, finally stripped of the roles she always hid behind. "Melody regrets it too," Nora added. "She says things never should have gotten this far. Says you don't owe anyone anything." Claire gave a dry, quiet laugh. "Too late, Mom. Everyone says I don't owe anyone only after I stopped paying. Only after everything fell apart do I suddenly become someone worth appreciating." Nora flinched but nodded. "You're right. I want you to know you matter. Even if you never forgive me, I needed to say that. Out loud, with the cold still on my shoulders." Claire looked at her mother for a long moment. The apology wasn't perfect, but it was real. It didn't erase the years. It didn't undo the silences, but it acknowledged them. "You chose Melody," Claire said softly. "When I needed a seat at the table, you told me to stay away because she was fragile. When the house needed heat, I paid. But when I asked for understanding, I got dismissed." "I know," her mother whispered. "When I stopped giving," Claire continued, "was the first time anyone noticed what I'd been carrying." Nora's eyes welled with tears. She didn't argue, didn't ask for sympathy. She stood still in the snow, waiting not for the door to swing wide, but for the words to land. "I'm not the same," Claire said. "Not the daughter who fixes everything quietly. Not the one who ties herself in knots to make sure no one else feels discomfort." Her mother nodded. "I'm not here to ask you to come back," she said, voice trembling. "I just want you to know you have worth. Even if it took me too long to say it." Claire's hand hesitated on the door. She didn't invite her in, but she opened the door a little wider, let her mother feel the warmth drift out, the soft hum of the heater, the faint aroma of cinnamon tea, the quiet of a home built not out of sacrifice, but intention. They stood in silence. One inside, one out. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't a new beginning. But it was something else. A moment of honesty between two women finally stripped of performance. "I'm not angry anymore," Claire said gently. "But I'm not going back either." Her mother closed her eyes, breathed in the heat like it was forgiveness. She stepped back, slowly nodded once, and turned away. Claire didn't watch her disappear. She simply closed the door. It clicked shut, not in bitterness, but in certainty. And when she returned to the living room, the light from the lamp caught the steam rising from her tea. It danced in the air like a small, stubborn hope, Not every apology opens a door, but sometimes the act of being heard is its own kind of warmth. It was mid-January when the message came. Claire had just finished folding a soft gray blanket, the scent of lemon detergent still clinging to its fibers. Her small apartment was warm, quiet, the radiator humming gently beneath the frosted window. Her phone buzzed once. Haley, her cousin. She picked it up without hesitation. Claire, Haley said, breathless, her voice laced with both exasperation and disbelief. The house on Ashwood is being listed. Your parents can't afford to keep it. Melody's moved out. She's sleeping on someone's couch in Eden Prairie. Claire sat at the kitchen table, fingers wrapped around her mug of mint tea. Steam curled up and vanished into the air. They're in a roadside motel now, Haley continued. By Highway 52, the kind people rent by the week. Paper-thin walls, your mom's still recovering from that fever, and Frank, he sold Grandpa's watches to cover a few more days of heating oil. Claire didn't interrupt. She just listened. She imagined the house, the one where she'd learned to ride her bike, where she used to press cookie dough into shapes on a flowered counter. The creaky stairs. The chipped tile in the downstairs bathroom. The heavy front door that always stuck in the winter. And now it was emptying. It wasn't theirs anymore. She wasn't sure if it ever truly had been. Haley's voice softened. Are you okay? I'm okay, Claire replied. Just a little sad at how it all ended. I'm not, Haley said without hesitation. You did the right thing. You finally stopped being their safety net. You let them see what life looks like without the person they always assumed would catch them. Claire said nothing. There was no triumph in her silence. No bitterness. She ended the call a few minutes later and placed the phone face down on the table. Outside snow fell thick and slow, blanketing the city in a soft hush. St. Paul in winter looked like a painting still gray and impossibly calm. She stood and walked to the small corner where she kept her tea jars, jasmine, rooibos, ginger. She chose lavender today. Something soft. She boiled water, poured it over the dried buds, and stood by the window as it steeped. Across the street, the bakery was just opening. Warm yellow light spilled out onto the snow. A man in a knit beanie held the door open for an older woman, and the smell of cinnamon seemed to drift all the way to her window. Claire turned, walked to her desk, and picked up her knitting needles. The scarf she was making was nearly finished, cream-colored wide, with just enough stretch to wrap around her twice. Each loop was like a thread of her new life, quiet, consistent, crafted only for herself. She didn't feel victorious. She didn't feel angry anymore. Mostly she just felt still. The house that had once been her anchor was now adrift, and somehow that freed her too. There was no longer a place to be summoned back to. No expectations dangling from holiday invitations. No more requests masked as obligations. Only space. Only air. She lit a vanilla candle on the windowsill and took a bite of the cranberry scone she'd baked that morning. It was soft, slightly warm, just enough sweetness. As she chewed, her eyes fell on the framed photo near the bookshelf. Thanksgiving 2019. Her and her parents. All smiles. She didn't turn it face down. She didn't throw it away. She simply looked at it like one might look at an old friend from another life. Fond, distant, and no longer necessary. She had made peace with the truth. Some homes are just buildings. And some homes are choices quiet ones made in small apartments where the heater hums, the tea never burns, and the person inside no longer needs permission to be warm. By the time March arrived, the snow had begun to retreat. Puddles formed on the sidewalks, and the gray slush of winter surrendered to shy crocuses peeking out from thawing earth. The wind was still cold, but softer somehow, as if winter had finally loosened its grip. Claire zipped up her light jacket and stepped into the fresh air, the early sun casting long golden streaks across the street. Her breath no longer fogged up in front of her. She didn't need gloves today. She walked 2 blocks to the used bookstore, where the bell above the door jingled like a quiet hello. The man behind the counter looked up and smiled. "Back for more stories." Claire smiled back. A new season calls for new voices. She wandered the aisles slowly, her fingers brushing spines, her mind clear. She picked out a novel by a woman who had moved across the country to start over after a divorce. Another book about learning to garden in small city apartments. Both sounded like warmth. On her way home, she passed a studio window filled with paintings, bold colors, wide brushstrokes, sketches pinned casually to the glass. A small sign read, "Spring registration now open. Watercolor for beginners." Claire paused, then stepped inside. That night, she registered for the class. She also bought herself a new notebook. The first entry she wrote, curled up in her living room with a blanket over her knees and a peppermint candle flickering on the table, was simple. Love is not endless sacrifice. It is recognition. It is return. And sometimes walking away is the only way to ever be seen. She paused after writing the words, letting them settle. Then continued. For years, I thought family meant showing up no matter what. Paying without asking. Carrying weight in silence. But now, I see family isn't built from obligation. It's built from mutual care, and if I must build it elsewhere, I will. She no longer waited for messages from Melody. She no longer checked her phone for missed calls from Nora. She no longer held her breath, waiting for a reunion that might mend what had never truly been held together. Claire lived fully in the present now. Her mornings were quiet and deliberate. Coffee brewed slowly, not in haste. The sun found her windows without obstruction. She started growing basil in a mason jar by the sink. At watercolor class, she met a woman named Judy, recently retired from teaching, and a young man named Luis who painted birds with surreal colors. They weren't family, but they were kind, curious, warm. Sometimes that was more than enough. One Sunday, Claire rode a bus to the Arboretum. She walked for hours, letting the green return to her eyes, letting the silence be sweet instead of lonely. There was no grand catharsis, no sweeping gesture of closure. Just a woman, mid-30s, painting violets in a sunlit studio, walking her own path without apology. One evening, as a light rain fell, Claire stood by her window, sipping chamomile tea. The rooftops glistened. Streetlights shimmered through thin mist. She thought briefly of the old house on Ashwood Street, but it didn't ache anymore. She didn't long for it. She didn't miss the wait. That place those people had chosen not to hold her when it mattered, and now she had learned to hold herself. Outside, a child laughed, splashing in a puddle. The sound was high and clear, slicing through the fog like music. Claire smiled. She picked up her notebook again and wrote, "Freedom isn't loud. Sometimes it sounds like a boiling kettle, like paint water swirling in a jar, like your own heartbeat, steady, finally heard." Then she looked out the window again and saw the snow melting not in fear or sorrow, but with ease. And for the first time in her life, Claire didn't feel cold anymore.